If you can.
The first night. The second night. The third night. The fourth night. The fifth night. The sixth night. The seventh night. The eighth night. The first night. And the second night, the third night, because the nights never end. Because Chanukah is only a model. Chanukah is a 1 week model that gets you rolling. And then we expect you to continue on forever.
Until when?
We're continuing this Chanukah from the last one. Right now,
Continuing this Chanukah
from Chanukah many years ago. Many years ago. There was one Chanukah.
We can't talk the first night anymore.
We can't
We're way into it.
And every night has all the nights. Chaim, holy brother.
Chaim.
It's all.
And the prologue of the story is.
Do we say L'chaim tonight, or we say just today?
We just say L'chaim. This Shabbos we were sitting with a few Yidden, and there was one. There was Chassidim, and there were Litvaks. There was all the Jews in the world were there. So we had this head. We said L'chaim, and everybody was just like looking at the L'chaim, and they weren't taking it serious. So we had this head that came down that there's a lot of Ims in the world. There's Chassidim, there's Lituim, there's Ims, there's Charaidim, there's Tzionim, there's all these Ims. So when you sit together, you say, what am I? I'm a L'chaim. So now, I'm an Im. Which Im? When you say like, you're a Chas, you're a Chassid, you're Im. I'm a L'chai. I'm to life. I'm from the to lifers. You know, I'm a life. You know, I'm not working for a living.
Not a birther.
I'm not working for a living. I'm not Chaz v'Shalom living to work, unfortunately. It's people who live to work. I'm living for a living. So L'chai means, what do you do? It's the name of there was a movie, it's called This Way of Life. And his tagline on the cover is, I live for a living. That was I live for a living. So, but usually, sometimes we forget that we're living for a living. Sometimes we get so stuck with, in order to live, we have to work. And we forget that I was working for something. But when we sit together, we say, who are you? No, I'm not a contractor. No. I'm not running hedge funds. No. I'm a L'chaim. So that's it, my friends. I just we should all be in the same zone that we're L'chaim. But, it's a big but. How do you become a L'chaim?
Gotta go to the mikvah first.
How do you become a L'chaim?
Definitely gotta go to the mikvah.
How do you become a L'chaim? So the prologue of the prologue of all stories, every story has a prologue. And you know, when you read a novel, they put the prologue in the beginning. So the beginning, the prologue is, and then Mashiach came. That's the prologue. It's the ending, which is really the beginning. But then you wonder, how did Mashiach develop? How did he get here? What's the story? Then you read the whole novel. Mashiach came, and then you say, so what's the story? I want to tell you a story. I was talking to David, and this story came up. And the klal is that when a story comes down, that's the story that has to be shared. And that's the story that we just remembered. Many years ago, I was by Yochi Pilchik. He lives here in Muncie, and his father was Yisrael Pilchik. He was a son of, he was called Zaidi Pilchik. Reb Nissen Pilchik in Stone was Zaidi. They called him Zaidi. Zaidi! And he was an American boy, and he was full of life. I remember one of my Rebbeim once said that he used to drezach in Stone. He used to say Tillim a lot. And somebody used to disturb him or come over to him. He said, don't bother me! I'm talking to my best friend. He was a real... So his son, he had Yisrael Pilchik. And Reb Yisrael, once... I used to chill with him a lot. I used to schmooze with him. He was sick the last years. And he learned in Lubavitch, because there was no yeshiva back in the day, so they learned in Lubavitch. There was no Stalin yet. And he sat together with the Shmuel Levittin. The Mechutanim with the Shmuel Levittin was one of the great Mashpirim in Chabad. And he told me, I told him once, I said, Yisrael, you dreid zich in Chabad, you were by Shmuel Levittin. Tell me a story that you know from the inside that I won't hear anybody else. Tell me that. So he told me that one time Reb Shmuel Levittin came out and he said, I was just by the Rebbe Rayatz called me in. And he said, Shmuel, once upon a time, one of the Talmidim from the Maggid was learning in Besmedish. It was late at night. And suddenly, as he's learning, this old man is suddenly there. And he has this beautiful, glowing white beard. His face is radiating. And he says, Willst du lernen? Willst du lernen? So he looks at him and he says, rechte Sach. It's proper. Aber ich darf fragen. I have to go ask. So he goes into the next room. If you were ever in Mezhebish, you know that there's this little room on the side where the Maggid used to sit. So he goes into the room where the Maggid was. Knocks in, he goes in and he says, Rebbe, there's this holy Jew, he wants to learn with me. Can I learn with him? And the Maggid asks him, which Jew? And he says, wow, that's no Jew. That's from the other side. Something from the other side. Wow, you just lucked out that you didn't go along with him. He would have taken you to bad places. And the Rebbe asked him, but why did you ask me? So it was a rechte Sach. It was right that you should learn with him. Why did you have this insight that you should come ask me if you should learn with him or not? You had no idea if this is good for you or not. Chaim. Today. So he said, I'll tell you why. He says, when I was a little child, my mother passed away. And I was a Yasam. And I was a little boy, I was a Yasam, and my father remarried. And everybody knows that it's not that simple. You remarry, you have a stepmother, and life was miserable. And my stepmother used to sit me at the edge of the table, and whenever she cooked something, she only used to give the food, the good food, the flesh, the meat, whatever was good, she used to give to her kids. And me, she sat me at the edge of the table, and she gave me the smallest last portion, because I was a stepchild. And life was mamish horrible. And one day I came home from Cheder, nobody was home, and there was a pot of food on the stove. And I took the ladle, and I took out the smallest portion, and I put it on like the smallest plate, and I sat on the corner. And I ate my portion. My stepmother comes home. You ate? You took without permission? And she gives me makas retzach. She beat the... I don't know. And I cried and I said, Favos, sie gewen a rechte Sach. I did the right thing. She said, Afilus is a rechte Sach. Darf man nach Alts fragen. Even if you did the right thing, even if it was correct, you still got to ask. And that downloaded somehow in my subconscious, like really went in really, really deep. That even if something is right, you still need to ask. So the Rebbe Rayatz turns to Shmuel Levittin. And he says to Shmuel, was lernt man sich von dem Meise? What's the moral of the story? So Shmuel said, as a philosopher is a rechte Sach, darf man nach Alts fragen. That even if it's the right thing, you have to ask. So he said, nah, come on. That's Pashup Pshat. And he understood that Rebbe wanted to tell him something, so he said, you know what you learn from the story? You learn from the story, he said, how Ashgacha Pratis works. You learn how the divine hand works. That in order that the prologue should be that he should end up in a good place, he had to become a Yasam. And he had to be seated at the edge of the table. And he had to get the last portion. And he had to go through all this pain and suffering. And he had to take that portion that day, and he had to have a stepmother who told him, in order that he should get something which one day is going to bring him to a powerful, tremendous place. That's the way I remember the story. I embellished it a little, but that was the thumbs of the story. I remember walking away that this is a story. But I was sitting now with David, and David, David asked, what's this Torah of Zorach with pellets, with the string? What's this whole story with the string? It's a very interesting story. You have this tale where you have this child who's being born, and this child sticks out his hand, and he gets this red ribbon or this red string wrapped around it. Then he pulls his hand back into the womb, and then his brother gets born first. And they say, hey, you're not the guy with the string. Paratsta pellets, you broke out. So they called him pellets. The brother, the next one comes out, and he's the one with the string. They say, Zarach. So we said that from the Bedichev. The Holy Bedichev explains that this is a pattern in life, and every person has to get this pattern of life, because this is the greatest secret of all times. That the way how inspiration works is that first we have a hand, and we're free, and we know it's going to be amazing. And then there's a ribbon tied around it that says remember. You know, you tie like why did they tie a ribbon around his hand? To remember that he's the one. Like you tie a ribbon around your finger to remember. So you tie a ribbon and you say remember. But then the hand gets pulled back in and you're back in the womb. And you say, hey, I thought I'm going to be free. It doesn't work that way. And then there's a fight and there's a struggle. And that struggle is called teretz, paratsta. You have to break out. When you break out, it's only because you fought. You only break something, you have to fight against the barrier until boom! And you're out. And then Zarach comes out and you say, wow, it's shining, it's beaming, it's amazing. And you remember that the red string and the Zarach came back together. Came full circle. In Kabbalah or in Chassidus, it's called Chacham ben Adas. And the trip of Chacham ben Adas, and everybody heard about Chabad, Chagas Nahim, and it's in the Svidus. What's the trip of Chabad? Chabad is Chachma. And Chachma is a spark. The Alter Rebbe says that Chachma is Koyach Ma. Kebarak HaMavrik. It's like as if you're sitting in a room and suddenly you're lost. You don't know how to get out. You're bumping into things. You don't know where the entrance is. You're lost. You're afraid. And then there's a thunder outside, and this bolt of lightning comes down, and the light in the room brightens up the room for just that split second. And in that split second, you get the scene, and then you're able to get out. So that's Chachma. That's Koyach Ma. You say, what was it? There was something, but I can't grasp it. I don't know what it is yet. And many times we have it, and we all have it, that we have this inspiration and we say, it's going to be so amazing. I know it's going to be good. I know I'm good now. But then it just dissipates. It disappears. No, like every time someone has a high in anything, the high, you want to just hold on to that high. You just want to be there forever. It's such a good place. But then it just disappears and you can't grasp it. And you find yourself back into the old you and the struggles, and you have habits. Then comes the step called Bina. Now the graphic mashal of it in Kabbalah is the male and female union. It's when a man and a woman, that's the whole Kabbalah is based on the Ducher and the Nukva. And the way how it works is that the Zachar, he gives the Zera. He gives the spark. Now the way how a child is born is it goes through a 3-step process. There's first the relationship, and by that relation there's a tremendous spark. There's a wow. There's an orgasm, just like wow. And that spark, that makes a connection between the Zera, but there's nothing from it. It disappears. And now the woman has to go 9 months, and she has to struggle. And that's called Bina. Chachmas Nashim Bonsa Beisa. That's called Bina. Bina is Mevin Dover Mitoich Dover, where you have to make building blocks, and she has to go through 9 months, and you take that Zera, and it doubles, and it quadruples, and it gets squared and squared and squared again, and there's a DNA within it that develops it, until after 9 months of struggles, now it goes through, like we said, a peretz, a paratsto. It has to break out, but that breaking out is, it's mamish between life and death in order to break out. It has to mamish go through the narrowest tzimtzum, the narrowest straits, and the narrowest passageway, mamish, that it has to experience, like it's till it comes out into a new world. And in that new world you say das. You say, wow, we actualized that Zera is now a walking live, breathing human being. It's wow. Now the way every child is born, that's the way we were born. And that's the same way our soul is born. And that model is called the model of a string. That's the Zera, that's the Chachma. And then there's the Peretz, which is the Bina, which is struggling to break out. And then when it actually comes out alive, that's the Das. And then it's wow. And then you say, V'yada Adam Aschava. V'yodas ishtoi. There was knowledge, and there was das, and there was knowledge that was brought down into a real place that's a living, breathing, systemized das, systemized oir. Its oir is bekelim. It's functional. It's functional. And that model is the model of everything in the Bria. That's the beginning of the story, L'chaim. It's the beginning of a long story. But L'chaim. Now a niggun. L'chaim.
Chaim, B'tzal, Chaim.